Normally when we talk about patronage, we're making calls for your money based entirely on you giving to us. But this week we want to talk about how we can give back to you.
Yes, we're beginning to get money in via our patrons, sufficient to think about new software licenses, new recording equipment, and, well, stuff.
Like podcast advertising, which is scarily expensive. I guess you've got to spend money in order to, in all likelihood, lose money.
Anyway, in order to motivate or demotivate you to send us your hard-earned or easily earned cash, we, and by we I really mean I, am going to produce weekly a short, probably 5 to 10 minutes, update on what I'm reading or researching as a patron-only special. That's for patrons on both our Patreon and Podbean patron systems, so no one is going to miss out.
Well, apart from all of you non-patrons, M's dulcet intonations about whatever famous 5 novel he happens to be reading this week are not for you.
None of this new patron special material will in any way detract from the usual lack of production you expect of us. It's just an added bonus for those of you who want it.
Plus, maybe, just maybe, there could be outtakes and the like from the episodes.
Although, truth be told, what you hear is basically everything we record.
But enough rampant consumerism, on with the show.
The Podcaster's Guide to the Conspiracy.
Hello and welcome to the Podcaster's Guide to the Conspiracy. My name is Josh Edison, sitting here in Auckland, New Zealand. His name is M. Dentith, sitting there in Bucharest, Romania. How about that?
It's magical.
It's literally
and
magical.
Not, as I was about to say, a madrigal.
That's a dance, is it? Or is it a music song thing?
It is a music song dance thing.
Right.
Although for some reason, whenever I say madrigal, I think of some kind of old world ape.
Well, the important point is that's not what this is. This is an episode of a podcast. You're listening to it now, piped into your ears. Supposedly, we had an interesting discussion just before recording as to whether or not I am actually real or merely a voice in M's head, and whether or not right now you guys are just listening to dead air, punctuated every now and then by him replying to the words that only he can hear. But I guess we'll never know, quite frankly.
No, because, as has been mentioned in the past, we don't get much in the way of correspondence to this podcast, which then makes me wonder, does anyone really exist? Or am I the last person on Earth sitting in an apartment in Bucharest, recording a podcast and uploading it to the dying servers of the internet, thus leading to me broadcasting my thoughts and feelings to an audience that doesn't exist?
I think on the balance of probabilities, that is the most likely scenario. But we're here anyway. Well, you're here, basically. That's all we can be sure of. So I guess we should just crack on with the news section. What else is there to do?
Indeed. Let's talk about my recent hallucinations about things that aren't going on in international politics.
Breaking conspiracy theories in the news.
We start this week's news segment with a piece which needs some introduction.
Yes, last week we learned that a senior military officer at the New Zealand Embassy in Washington, D.C., that's in the US for you blissfully ignorant of international politics, had installed spy cameras in the toilets in the embassy. He even left his own DNA on the SD cards in the cameras, which raises more questions than we're willing to answer.
Now, this seems to be just a bad hombre doing a bad thing, but no. You see, according to the fine minds at Kiwi Blog, one of Aotearoa's biggest political blogs,
And a rather right-wing one at that.
the Commodore Keating, has been conspired against by the gutter press and the new left-wing government. You see, privacy issues aside, these fine minds think the most likely story is that the Commodore was probably just rooting out spies.
Or homosexuals.
And the media interest is just an outrage. Not just that, but he's only being persecuted for it because the police have been politicised by the new Labour New Zealand First Greens government.
Now, you might be asking, what's their evidence? And that's a good question. The answer to which is none. No one has any evidence this is a put-up other than the fact that he's a Commodore, and apparently reaching that rank means he must be a fine and upstanding person.
The people in positions of authority would never abuse anyone defense is a rather curious one, given that the very same people who are saying this is a put-up are also accusing senior members of the New Zealand police force as being up to no good. It's almost as if there is a curious double standard going on.
Also, why is the Commodore apparently so worried about homosexuals?
Indeed. Now an update on Devon Nunes, whose name we repeatedly get wrong on the show, leading us to simply refer to him as the Noonster.
Which, in retrospect, makes him sound like Herman Munster's cousin, or a superhero from a convent.
That would be an ecumenical matter.
Yes. You might recall that the Munster has been requesting documents from the Department of Justice about that collusion investigation, threatening to sue said department for obstruction of justice if he doesn't get unredacted documentation about the investigation.
Well, you might be happy to find out he has got that documentation. He just doesn't seem very interested in reading it.
Yes, upon gaining access to the files, he simply got one of his aides to read it for him, and has since been on national TV in the US refusing to talk about the issue, saying that he never comments on such matters publicly, which is a bald-faced lie given his prior statements, but whatever.
We can add that the Nunster's lack of interest in reading documentation to a pile of unread documents. He's also admitted that the document he wrote deploring the FBI's application for a FISA warrant on Carter Page was based on him not actually reading the FISA application, but rather relying on an aide's summary of the application.
That, and this recent event, leads a certain amount of credence to the theory that the Nunmeister isn't so much interested in getting to the truth of the matter, but rather obfuscating on behalf of President Trump. Seems a bit like a plot, really.
A conspiracy?
Well, we couldn't possibly comment. We're hardly the podcaster's guide to the conspiracy, after all.
And in much happier news, an update on MH370, the story which will dog us until the sun eventually gets swallowed by a giant space goat.
Happy news?
Yes, strangely, yes. You see, the search for the missing Malaysia Airlines flight has resulted in the finding of several 19th century shipwrecks at the bottom of the ocean, which is nice for underwater archaeologists.
So you're saying the search for the tragic victims of MH370 has resulted in finding the tragic victims of earlier missing craft?
Well, I guess you could.
So the search for MH370 is finding more and more victims of the insidious and cruel ocean. Man, someone needs to go to war with the sea.
Caligula tried that. It wasn't very successful.
Once again, I did Egyptian history, so you can keep your poxy Roman emperors out of my news segments. Anyway, we're going to say something about the whole Stormy Daniels affair, since it's increasingly looking like there's something to the story which smacks of conspiracy, but...
Rudy Giuliani keeps changing his story about what he knows. Donald Trump knows, and Michael Cohen knows. It's all a bit dirty.
Which, of course, brings us to the topic of this week's episode, some of our own dirty politics. Yes, this week's topic is politics. And you know me, if I'm going to have politics, I like my politics dirty. As dirty.
You also like your politics local.
Local, dirty, filthy politics.
Now, Joshua, I've been away from the country, and thus I'm not as au fait with what's going on, which is in part due to the terrible time difference between Romania and Aotearoa, New Zealand. So many of the things which happen in your day are occurring whilst I'm asleep. So tell me, why is there a dirty politics scandal going on back home at the moment?
I take issue with the fact that I'm better informed than you. I'm quite happily and proudly ignorant of most matters, political at least, but I think I can fill you in here. So, dirty politics is a bit of a loaded term in New Zealand. It's something that's been around for a while. It's a label. It's kind of a leftish equivalent of fake news. It's a loaded term that gets applied to any kinds of dirty politicking that generally comes from the righter end of the political spectrum. In this case, I should get this out of the way at the start. We're running a little bit late on this one. It kind of came up last week just as we were getting things together to record last week's episode, so we didn't really have time to give it the proper treatment last week. But at the time that we're recording it now, it's almost pretty much completely blown over, so we're a little bit late.
Because this week's scandal is the Made in New Zealand scandal.
Which is not at all political and more just amusing. And maybe we'll go into it, but probably not, quite frankly. But no, the substance of the scandal is, on the 2nd of May, I believe it was, which was last Wednesday, the New Zealand Herald ran a story concerning rumours about Clarke Gayford. Clarke Gayford is the partner of our current Prime Minister, Jacinda Ardern. He's a local media personality. He's been on TV shows and radio shows and so on. I think his latest one was a fishing show. And according to the Herald, there had been rumours about him circulating for the past 7 months on certain areas of the internet. And the Herald wanted us to know that both they and the New Zealand police force had looked into these rumours and found that they are completely untrue and there's no substance to them whatsoever. Now, as for what the actual rumours are, I don't actually know. We probably shouldn't know, especially because lawyers have been in touch with various media agencies saying that if anyone does actually publish the substance of these rumours, they will be sued for defamation. And indeed, I believe New Zealand's defamation laws mean that you could even be sued simply by directing people to somewhere where they could find out this information. So while it did circulate on certain websites in New Zealand, I don't think we'll be mentioning those actual websites, just referring to them in more general terms. Now, the reason why the dirty politics label got attached to this one is because the idea was that this is, if not the National Party, then National Party supporters or people sympathetic to the National Party are doing their same old routine of chucking around dirty slurs at their political opponents. And they have a bit of a history about this, and it's a history that we've talked about on this very podcast before.
Indeed. In fact, there's even a book about this, which is titled Dirty Politics by New Zealand journalist Nikki Hager.
So I suppose it's probably worth giving a bit of a recap of that, although we have discussed it here. The name Dirty Politics goes back to 2014. Which was the year when we had a general election. Not the last one was last year. We have a 3-year electoral cycle in New Zealand. So in the 2014 general election, shortly before that, Nikki Hager, a local journalist, published a book called Dirty Politics. And in that book, he detailed how information damaging to the parties on the left, most particularly the New Zealand Labour Party, had been circulated via the internet, and it spoke to a sort of scheme whereby either members of the National Party or their staffers or people associated with them, people with inside knowledge, would sort of drip feed this information to sympathetic bloggers and internet personalities who would then actually do the disseminating of the information, so that these damaging rumours, or in some case damaging facts, could get out there, but the actual National Party could claim sort of, plausible deniability. So there were things like, as I recall, one of them was Phil Goff, who was the leader of the Labour Party at the time. There was an issue involving Israel and Israeli diplomats or something, which Phil Goff claimed he hadn't been briefed about, and then not long after, wouldn't you know it, someone leaked SIS documentation showing that Phil Goff very much had been briefed about this thing. So it was embarrassing to him. But the point was the way this came about. It suddenly showed up on a very right-leaning blog. And yet it was information that would have had to have come from inside we don't have a Department of Defence, Ministry of Defence.
Yes, although it actually turned out the information was coming out from a staffer in the office of the Prime Minister.
Yes, there you go. So...
Well, I should point out, the Prime Minister at the time claimed he had no idea this was going on, even though one of his top staffers was engaged in leaking this information to bloggers like Cameron Slater and the like.
That was Jason Eade, was it?
It was
Staffer,
indeed.
yes, who
Jason
resigned.
Eade, indeed.
Who resigned the day before the 2014 election, as I recall. So anyway, Nikki Hager's book came out. Now, Nikki Hager is someone we've talked about, not only about dirty politics, but also the business of the civilian casualties around an SA raid carried out by New Zealand SAS troops. He has a history of very left-leaning politics, there's no denying that, of making claims damaging to the government of the time. He was behind Corngate, wasn't he?
He was indeed.
Which was a scandal involving GMOs and corn. That was very damaging to the left-leaning Labour government of the time. And the one thing to say about him is that I don't believe he's ever been proved wrong. He's said things damaging to the government, which the government has denied and kicked up a fuss about, but at the end of the day, when the dust has settled, he's always turned out to be right. And this seemed to be the case with dirty politics as well. His book really showed that these sort of dodgy dealings were going on, even though at the time the government denied it. And it must be said, it ended up not really having much of an effect. National, who were in power before the 2014 election, were in power again after the 2014 election. No one really seemed to be too fussed about it. The general attitude of the public seemed to be, this is just the sort of crap that these politicians do all the time. They're all up to it. Who cares? Dodgy dealings, that's not news. And it was, on a slight tangent, quite sort of relevant to us at the time, because National Party leader, Prime Minister John Key, at the time dismissed Nikki Hager as a, quote, screaming left-wing conspiracy theorist. And part of the project of trying to rehabilitate the notion of conspiracy theories and conspiracy theorists is that when you buy into a pejorative definition of conspiracy theorist, it allows people in power to write off accusations against them as just a conspiracy theory and kind of get away with it. So,
although it should be pointed out, what was interesting about the public's reaction to John Key describing Nikki Hager as a screaming left-wing conspiracy theorist was that the public of Aotearoa, New Zealand kind of went, that might well be the case, but is what he's saying true? Which kind of fits in with no one disbelieved his claims about dirty politickings, despite the protestations of the Prime Minister and the Cabinet. But at the time, the rival Labour Party wasn't seen as being able to organise a piss-up in a brewery. So the population went with the devil they knew, rather than what appeared to be an incompetent opposition at the time.
So fast forward to 2015, when we got Dirty Politics 2, the sequel, which was that confusing affair involving this fellow Ben Ratinger and hacking of Labour Party websites and who had done it and who was conning who and who had hacked who and so on, and that all just got a little bit messy. But now, here in 2018, we have Dirty Politics 3. It's back and it's pissed off.
Now, I have to point out, I may well be aware of what allegations have been made and how it all started, but as said beforehand, the overly broad defamation laws back home means that we really can't say anything particularly specific about the allegations against Clarke Gayford. All we can talk about is the way they've been treated and some of the suspicions about who knew and who didn't know, which might suggest a bit of a conspiracy going on a number of different levels back home.
Now, the Herald article, which seemed to kick it all off, basically came about because the New Zealand police actually issued a statement, which is quite unusual for them. But apparently, whatever the rumours are, they were serious enough that people were apparently going to the police saying, "Hey, have you heard this about Clarke Gayford? Are you going to investigate him?" Suggesting that whatever the rumours were, they were implications of some sort of illegal activity on his behalf. And apparently, the nature of them and the number of them caused the police to actually officially come out and say, "No, we are not investigating Clarke Gayford." In fact, the official statement said, While in general we do not respond to inquiries which seek to confirm if individuals are under police investigation, on this occasion we can say that Mr. Gayford is not and has not been the subject of any police inquiry, nor has he been charged in any relation to any matter. And the Herald themselves claimed that it had conducted, quote, exhaustive inquiries, unquote, and also found no substance to the rumours. But in a sense, that was kind of enough, because unless you happened to go to the right websites or follow the right people on Twitter, you would have never even known that these rumours existed, despite them supposedly being around for 7 months at the time. But the New Zealand Herald, New Zealand's largest newspaper, starts talking about them, and suddenly everyone wants to know, oh, actually, what were these rumours? Even though everyone in authority is saying they're not at all true, people do love a gossip, don't they?
They do indeed. In fact, what I find fascinating about this entire furore is due to the time difference. I wasn't aware of any of the rumours before the Herald article came out. So when the Herald piece came out, I was going, oh, what have I been missing on the social medias? And so I scrolled back through my Twitter timeline and looked at my Facebook updates. And most of the people I follow weren't talking about these issues. So I think it's fair to say that, once again, unless you were in a particular Twitter bubble or in with the right people, these rumours were not well known. Although that being said, I know of people back home with no social media attachments whatsoever who have heard about these rumours through the grapevine, literally people coming into shops and saying, oh, have you heard the rumour about the Prime Minister's husband? Blah, 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 blah. Actually, it's not her husband at all. They're not even married.
She's an unwed pregnant mother. Scandalous.
Who also happens to be Prime Minister of an OECD nation. Mm-hmm. It's amazing.
And 37 years old, I think. Younger than you or I.
But not younger than both of us put together. Yes, actually, no, she is younger than both of us put together. my mathematics really failed me there.
Quite wonderfully. Yes, I mean, the fact that people were forced to acknowledge the existence of these rumours and make them public in a big way kind of counts as a win, I suppose, for the rumour mongers. It's the old make them deny it strategy. So, yes, as you say, since we can't talk about the actual substance of the rumours, we can, though, talk about the reaction to them and the fuss around them. So the Herald definitely made the absolute most of the entire issue. There were, there was the initial reports, and then people's reaction to the reports, and then reactions to the reactions, and then reports of the reactions, and then reports of the reactions to the reports of the reactions to the reports. It just sort of kept going and going. Everybody was sticking their oar in. So the Herald was certainly, and other news outlets in the country were not short of content for a few days there. Where should we go? Should we go to the commentariat or go a little bit deeper first? What do you think?
By the commentariat, who are you referring to?
I'm talking about the Hoskings and the Hill Cones of the world.
Yeah, so the most sensible, and I'm using sensible here in its most ridiculous fashion, response to the whole Clarke Gayford rumour scandal was by perennial opinion piece writer and someone who claims not to be a journalist, Mike Hosking, who used to present a current affairs-ish show at 7 p.m. on TVNZ, and now is actually always has been a radio host for Radio Live, has an opinion piece in the Herald, notably right-wing, and his response was, well, hold my beer, you should hear the rumours about me, because Mike Hoskins likes to make everything about him whenever possible.
And indeed, it could be said the Herald was pretty much making everything about them as well, with the extent of their coverage. An interesting little facet to it was that a week or two before the story about the rumours, there was an opinion piece by one of their other columnists called Deborah Hill-Cohen, who's one of those opinion columnists who tends to like to put out vaguely incendiary things, vaguely sort of attention-seeking, guaranteed argument-starting sorts of things. I haven't noticed a particular political bias in her writings. She's more just the sort who'll say anything if it'll get reactions from the readers. And
The only bias I think I've detected is that of self-absorption.
And so in that vein, she published a piece a couple of weeks beforehand, basically saying, is it just me, or is that Clarke Gayford a bit off? And basically a whole column about how she didn't really like Clarke Gayford much. And once again, well, no, in fact, not once again, before the Rumour's business and the Herald making hay out of that, they made a hell of a lot of hay out of this one. So there was the Hillcone story, there were what people thought about the Hillcone story, there was reporting on what people had said about it, there was reactions to the reactions, and on and on and on and on and on.
I should also point out they made her opinion piece appear to be a breaking news piece in the Herald. So an opinion piece was presented as, you must read this story, Deborah Hillcone's views on Clarke Gayford.
And yes, it all just came across as a little bit silly and attention-seeking and grasping from all concerned. But it did take on a slightly more sinister angle once the subsequent rumours came out, because we thought, well, these rumours, although they weren't known widely to the public at large, they were certainly known about in media circles, which means Deborah Hillcone had probably heard these rumours and then chose to publish an opinion piece, sort of having a mild crack at Clarke Gayford. Was she attempting to try and sort of soften up the public to the idea of not liking him should these rumours surface and turn out to have substance to them? Or indeed, even if they didn't have substance to them, was she trying to sort of sour the public opinion of him so that they would be more likely to believe these rumours regardless of whatever anyone said about them?
Now, of course, that's a rather explicit conspiracy theory there, where Deborah Hillcone
totally
is part of a
of course.
cartel of people. Of course, the other hypothesis was that Hillcone may well have been aware that there was a police statement forthcoming, or at least very much aware that the Herald were looking into these rumours towards Clarke Gayford, and thought, I need to make sure I'm the right side of history. So I think there might be something to these rumours. I'm going to pen a piece showing that I've always been a bit suspicious about Clarke Gayford. So when it turns out that these rumours are true, people go, oh, that Deborah Hillcone, she knows what's what. And that doesn't require her to be in on a conspiracy. That just requires her to be self-serving and wanting to be seen on the right side of history.
So yes, could be either way. So that's sort of the interesting salacious side of things. But how is this similar to other similar affairs that we've seen in New Zealand politics?
Well, I'm going to bring up two words now, which if I use them on Twitter means I get harangued for days and days and days, and those words are Laudafinum. Laudafinum is a blog which ostensibly doesn't operate in New Zealand and is located offshore, with the people behind the blog being located offshore. There's a certain amount of debate as to whether that is actually true, but we will accept the writers of Laudafinum at their word at this particular point in time. And Laudafinum claims to be a kind of law and order, crime and punishment blog. And yet, essentially, the blog appears to be a series of attacks on particular business people within Aotearoa, New Zealand, and the suggestion of large-scale police corruption. Now, the Laudafinum stories have never, ever become particularly big. So Laudafinum stories get noticed by people like me who study conspiracy theories, but don't often get noticed by anyone else. Oh, and somehow I've said something that has made Siri think I said, hey Siri. I just need to make that go away. I wonder what I actually said. Oh, I said, hey series of attacks on people, and it thought that is hey Siri. That's a nice little bit of
non-scripted comedy.
Yes,
Sort of.
yes, good old, I really should turn off that Hey Siri thing. I also shouldn't say that word again because it's just going to activate it. In fact, now it's recording what I'm saying, and I'm just going to make that disappear. Apparently it's beyond her abilities at this particular point. I've just gendered a computer. That's terrible.
Well,
Anyway,
yes.
so yes, a lot of Farnham stories have never ever made it into big news, but it's always been quite clear that there's a certain cohort of people, a particular part of the blogger community, which is actually quite fascinated by what Lord of Farnham have to say. And this appears to be a similar situation. So I'm not saying the Lord of Farnham people are behind these rumours. As far as I'm aware, it's a completely different website presenting this particular information. But it is once again a case of spreading a story and hoping it's going to be picked up. So this is part of a long pattern of dirty politicking back home. And in this particular case, the Clarke Gayford story has actually made it to the point where people in positions of authority have had to say something about it. But possibly the most interesting aspect here is how all of this, Lord of Farnham included, appears to be a kind of sanitized version of a conspiracy theorist we've never really spoken about, but is kind of dear to my heart, and that's Greg Hallett and the Spy Master.
Oh, sounds sexy.
It does. So Greg Hallett and the Spy Master appears to be two people, although Greg Hallett is an actual person, and the Spy Master is an alleged governmental insider who may or may not actually exist. He may just be part of Greg Hallett's research or possibly imagination. And Greg Hallett and the Spy Master have written at length in self-published books about the pedophile and lesbian conspiracy at the heart of our government. And this has been a conspiracy theory that has been circulating in amongst particular parts of the conspiracy sphere back home for quite some time now. But it's never really had much traction outside of hardcore believers in pedophile conspiracy theories around the world. And Lord of Farnham, which also every so often hints at a seedy underbelly to our governmental system, has never had much in the way of particular penetration into national discourse. And yet the Clarke Gayford stuff seems to have been plausible to the point where people have been willing to trade this information in social media and along the grapevine, leading to, at some point, either police complaints, so people going to police and saying, why aren't you investigating this? Or the police learning about this, or someone in the government learning about this and asking the police to comment, leading to an official statement that, as far as anyone is aware, there is nothing to the rumours that we're not telling you about.
So there you have it. It was interesting to watch. I haven't seen anything about it in the news for a day or two, so I think it's probably blown over and the news cycle's moved on. But it was interesting to look at nevertheless. What is it an example of dirty politics as it has existed before? Maybe a little bit hard to say, given that whatever the rumours are, it doesn't seem like they would have required insider government knowledge to start it, so that there doesn't seem to be any evidence that forces within the National Party actually directed their stooges to start besmirching Clarke Gayford's name. It's entirely possible that simply right-leaning people who'd like to have a go, indirectly have a go at the Prime Minister, could have thought up these rumours and started circulating them all on their own sim. I guess we'll never know, because we're not allowed to talk about it, and we probably shouldn't, because spreading rumours that are known to be false is just kind of a bit of a dick move.
Although, as you pointed out, the fact the rumours are being talked about without the content of those rumours being confirmed kind of lets the rumour mongers win, and that people know now there is a story about a Bart. I'm having spoonerisms galore today. There is a story about Clarke Gayford out there that people don't want you to know about. And that's going to lead some people to think he's a little bit suspicious. And given there's a particular part of the public who aren't particularly fond of Jacinda Ardern for the sheer fact she's young, she's pregnant, and she's unmarried, having rumours about her partner abounding is going to lead towards some people going, there's something off about our Prime Minister.
Indeed, and there's a certain breed of person who, when confronted with the New Zealand police force issuing an official statement saying nothing's going on there, and with the Herald saying we've investigated, nothing's going on there, who will look at that and say, well, they would say that, wouldn't they?
They would, Joshua. They would.
So I think we've come to the end of an episode. And if all things go to plan, we'll have a new ending outro thing which will cover all our contact details, so I don't have to do it right now like I normally do.
Indeed, we can simply abruptly end and say goodbye, although that just seems a bit rude. It seems like we should say something. So is there a moral, Joshua? Is there a moral to the tale we've just told?
None whatsoever.
So have we learnt anything?
Nothing. Absolutely nothing.
Excellent. I'm glad to see the educational opportunities afforded by this podcast continue to be at the rate of nothing.
In fact, given our conversation at the start of this episode, it's probably fair to say we're now no less than we did to begin with. We're not even really confident of the existence of me, of the outside world, of anything, really.
That's just depressing. I think we should go now.
I think we better before things get worse. Goodbye.
Goodbye.
You've been listening to the Podcaster's Guide to the Conspiracy. It is written, researched, and performed by Josh Addison, aka Monkey Fluids, and MRX Dentith, aka Conspiracism on Twitter. This podcast is available where all good podcasts can be found, as well as iTunes, Podbean, and Stitcher. It can also be watched on YouTube. Just search for the Podcaster's Guide to the Conspiracy, or, if you happen to be technophobic, consult the auguries. You can support the Podcaster's Guide to the Conspiracy via our Patreon page, as listed in the podcast description, or just by searching for us on Patreon. You can also support us via the Podbean patronage system, if that is more your style. You do you. If you want to get in contact with us, why not email us at podcastconspiracy@gmail.com, or find us on Facebook. And remember, Soylent Green is Meeples.